Snow day. A couple years ago, I find myself in a very disturbing situation. I was getting off work at my student internship in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it had been snowing all day. Now, for all you guys who live in the South, you know it's a big deal when it even calls for snow, and grocery stores are raided the nights before. I had decided to go and get some groceries to enjoy with my girlfriend, now wife, since the mayhem had ended and only people like me who had trucks or all-terrain vehicles could get around. I went into Walmart and got the groceries I needed and started my way back to my truck. It had started to snow harder, and there was already 5 to 7 inches on the ground, and it was around 12 in the afternoon. I was daydreaming about sledding and watching movies the next couple of days with my girlfriend. Just then, as I almost reached my truck, I was jolted by the act of someone grabbing my arm, and as I turned around, I saw an older-looking lady who was maybe 5 foot 6 inches. She asked me if I had cigarettes. Now, I don't smoke, so I told her no, I did not, and turned back to my truck. Again, she gently tugged on my arm, and then she told me that she just got here from Alabama on a bus with her granddaughter and dog, and she was here for breast cancer treatment and wanted money for a hotel. Again, I honestly told her that I had no money on me, which I purposely do because I don't like donating to people's drug habits, and would rather get people food myself if that's what they really want. At this point, she said, "Do you know the area well?" Wanting to get out of this situation, I said no, I did not, which was a lie, I guess, thinking now she'd leave me alone. Then she asked, "Oh, okay. Well, since the weather is so bad, will you drive me to my hotel so I can meet up with my granddaughter and her dog, who are in the hotel lobby waiting? It's right up the road here, I can show you." Now, me being a Christian, and was always taught to help people out, so even though everything at this moment told me to deny this woman again, I told her sure, since I was raised on the rule, never judge a book by its cover, plus being a male at 6 foot height. So she jumped in my truck against all odds, and the next thing I know, she's smoking a cigarette in my truck, and I told her politely to please put it out. Being nervous, I missed my first red flag when she asked me for a cigarette, since she obviously had some. She obliged and threw the cigarette out the window to my dismay, so we started driving up the road towards her hotel, at which I was on high alert. At the moment of going through worst case scenarios in my head, I notched her fumbling through her purse searching for something, and looking out of the corner of her eye at me, at which I told her, "Just so you know, I have a gun in my truck, so don't try anything crazy." Now, I did have a gun, but it was a shotgun that I had neglected to get out of my backseat a couple days earlier, and in reality, this would do me no good if she pulled a gun on me at that moment. At this, she stopped messing around in her purse and pulled out her cell phone in her pocket. She looked at me and said, "Actually, do you mind taking a detour? I need to pick up some money from some friends." Okay, at this point, red flags were firing off in my head, but again, never judging a book by its cover, that phrase kept running through my mind, so I told her that was fine, but we had to make it quick, because I needed to make it home. At that moment, she dialed someone on the phone and said, "Yeah, this guy's coming over to bring me to get the stuff. You're ready, right?" At that point, I asked her to talk to the person. When I answered the phone, a man who sounded like he's been chain smoking since birth said, "Hello." I started asking him questions like, "What's your name?" and asked him if indeed he knew of any hotels nearby. He seemed to stumble over his words, then said he had to go. At this point, I should have gotten a clue and kicked her out of my car, especially after watching so many horror movies of the same exact situation. This is when the person goes against their gut and pays for it. This is that moment. But for fear of her actually telling the truth, and me feeling like a terrible person, I decided to go on with this. At this point, we turned down the street, and I saw a cop car sitting there off the side. I wanted to drop her off with the cop, but I would feel terrible if she was actually telling the truth. So I passed the cop at this point with a weird, eerie smile on her face, said, "Glad he's there, now I feel safe." As we entered the apartment complex, I saw just how run down it was. It looked to be a place where heavy drug traffic was going down, just a very unsettling place even during the snow. As I parked outside the place, she said her friends were. She said, "Okay, I'll go get the guy and be back. At this, I was very unsettled by everything. Things just didn't seem right. She saw my facial expression of wanting to get the heck out of there, and at this, she sneered at me, saying something along the lines of me being a terrible person if I just left her there, in this weather under her condition. At this, I got mad. After all, I went out of my way to help her. As I waited, I started to think about how things could happen. What if she brought back a gun or worse? At that moment, I saw 3 guys coming towards my truck. I realized things were not right. She had set me up to rob me or something, because these guys were big, and one of them had something behind his back, which I could not see. At that moment, I put it in reverse and took off. Thank God for 4-wheel drive. I looked back to them chasing me, and to see that what was hidden behind one of the guys' back was a crowbar. I don't know what would have happened to me, but now looking back on it, I see how dumb and blind I was. There was no hotel anywhere close to the area I was in. The nearest hotel or motel was 20 minutes away. Had I waited for the guys to get to my truck, they probably would have beaten me and robbed me. Or worse. I thank God every day that I escaped and was able to get married until this event. After that, I've never been to that Walmart ever again, or the area for that matter. A couple months later, I told a coworker this story, and he told me that a year ago, the same lady tried the same thing to him, but he declined altogether, which is a smart move on his part. So, horrible lady who lied about having breast cancer to trick people into awful things. I hope you get what's coming to you, and let's never meet again. So be careful who you help out, because some people will take advantage of you, or even worse. Footprints in the snow. It's funny, I don't think I'd ever get to participate in the sub, but as I read, things keep popping up into my head. Background. A few years ago, my parents and I moved to the Maritimes. My parents were retiring and I was done high school. Our house is situated at the very center of, and I mean this literally, a village. There are 20 people in this place at the most. The house is 300 feet from the road and has forests surrounding it, except the front, which are fields that border the driveway. Anyways, the year we moved, I ended up moving away to Ottawa for school. That same year, I went back home for Christmas between semesters. I'm your typical night owl, and my parents hate it. They were bugging me about sleeping in so much because they hadn't seen me in months, and I was sleeping away all our time together. The incident. That night, I stayed up until sunrise, hoping to fix my sleep cycle. It was about 5:45 a.m. when my dog woke up and came into my room. She rested her head on my lap, and so I knew she wanted out. I went downstairs, made myself a tea, and then put a coat on, and for whatever reason, that winter it didn't snow that much. But this particular day, it snowed around 2 a.m. I remember because when I went to the bathroom, I got excited when I saw it falling. Anyways, I put on my coat and headed out with my dog. Usually she bolts out the door. She's fucking insane and does laps and laps around the house at full gallop. But this day she didn't. Instead, she put her nose on the ground and trotted slowly around the house. Now, I thought it was weird, so I followed her. That's when I noticed the footsteps. My parents' property has 3 buildings on it, a 2-door garage, a workshop, and the house itself. The driveway runs from the road, and sorts of pools connecting all 3 buildings. The buildings make an L shape. The snow that had fallen was only 2 centimeters or so, and so I noticed running from the forest, the bottom right point of the L behind the house, a set of prints. I was extremely curious, so I followed them. They literally came out of the forest and ran around behind my house, where they stopped at a window. I lined up my feet and found myself looking in the window. Then the prints turned 90 degrees and vanished into the forest. That's when I realized the snow had fallen at around 2 a.m. So, whoever had left these prints must have come after that time. Or they wouldn't have left prints, obviously. And well, I assume most of the world is dark between 2 and 5:45 a.m. So either this guy was wandering in the woods at night, or they had wandered out when the sun came up. So I shouted for my dog and we hustled inside. I told my dad and he told me that he'd left the prints, which is bullshit, because I was up all night and heard him snoring all night. Thanks for trying to calm my nerves anyway, though. Amidst the snowstorm. I still remember vividly the day I almost got abducted. I was 12 years old and lived in an isolated seaside city, surrounded by the boreal forest. The closest big town was a 2-hour car drive, and, as any lonely place, the area I grew up in was extremely depraved. Half mining town, half Indian reservation, people there were, and still are, extremely prone to violence, thief and drug and alcohol abuse. From my first year up until 4th grade, I went to a nearby school that was 2 small streets, or about 200 meters away from my home. But this school didn't have 5th grade, so I ended up using the bus for the first time the year this happened. Now, at 6 a.m., I would walk out my front door and a few streets away until I got into a long street with several intersections. Every morning, our bus would pick up 3 students to a stop that was perhaps 100 meters ahead, turn at an intersection to pick other students, come back and take us in. Me and my 2 stop mates, always thought it was kind of stupid to put 2 stops into a single street. And when we felt like sitting down early, we'd walk the extra distance to get in before the intersection. One morning, I got out early, as I had noticed a heavy snowstorm, and tough the wind would slow me down in my walk towards a stop. I was shivering all the way there, and looked right at the other stop. No one was there yet. I thought a few students might have not shown up because of the temperature outside, while others probably still watching the news to check if today was a snow day. I remember touching my face and feeling spots of hardened cold skin around my cheeks. Small frostbites are a common occurrence in this kind of climate, but I immediately walked up to the pre-intersection stop so my cheeks wouldn't get any worse. These always hurt as hell when they warm up, so I wanted to get it done with as soon as I could. For a few minutes there was nothing but me, the raging wind and the sting of the snowflakes hitting my face. Then, I saw an old gray car turn over the corner and roll at an astoundingly slow pace in my direction. My heart began to pound faster as I noticed the dirty-looking native that was staring at me from the driver's seat. He passed by me and pulled over into the bike lane. I stared at him from the other side, far of the street, wondering what the hell this man was doing this early, obstructing the entire bike lane in the middle of a friggin' snowstorm. Now, I had slight vision problems, but hadn't yet been diagnosed, so I squinted as hard as I could to try and see what was going on inside of that car. That's the moment when I realized he was holding something vertically in his left hand, and that said something was pointing right at me. It was a camera. I started to panic as my muscles literally froze into place, paralyzed by fear. Why the hell was this man taking pictures of me? The thing that struck me the most was the weird way he held his camera, using only one hand and holding it sideways. At that moment, I began to breathe more and more heavily, as I realized that I was too far from my house to run up there, and that most people were likely asleep with their doors locked. In that moment, I realized I was stuck. If he decided to attack me for some reason, there was no way I could escape. Run, I thought, as the car slowly began to move again, and turned over to the side of the road I was standing on. But I was so shocked, so panicked, that my body at that very moment simply refused to obey me. He drove in this disturbing, painfully slow way. As he got closer and closer to me, I nearly lost consciousness as he reached my stop. I felt his car begin to slow down even more, when I suddenly heard a loud humming sound coming from further up the street. Another car suddenly pierced through the veil of snow, making the native man jam his foot on the gas pedal and take off at maximum speed. If it wasn't for this exact set of circumstances, I might have been caught in God knows what awful situation. One of my stopmates arrived a few seconds afterwards, and at that moment I finally gathered the courage to run towards her. 2 years later, the corpse of an abducted 5-year-old was found in the nearby woods. I'll never know for sure if this story is related to mine, but I shiver every time I think I might have been staring at a murderer right in the eyes. I later called the cops, describing the events, and got a promise that they would patrol the area more often. I never saw a police car in the surrounding in the 5 following years. As for the picture, I'll never know if it's been deleted, if it's hanging in some psycho's private collection, or if it's out there in some twisted site for all to see. So, if you happen to accidentally stumble upon a strange website and see a picture of a chubby little girl with a bright pink hat and frostbitten cheeks standing amidst a snowstorm, you'll know the story behind it. Man in the snow. This encounter is real and happened to me 6 years ago when I was 16 years old. For context, I'm female. I live in New England, a northeastern region of the United States, where the winters are very snowy, with long dark nights and short days. One such night in February, I was alone in my parents' house, which is in a safe, quiet suburban neighborhood, where the houses are within about 100 feet of each other. My parents had divorced years before and were still on good terms, so when my mom decided to sell the childhood home, my dad bought it so I could continue living there. While in the process of moving, neither of my parents stayed at the house for a couple nights, and only my room upstairs had furniture. The rest of the house was mostly empty with boxes scattered about, and the internet had not yet been switched over, so I often sat at the far end of the living room and mooched off our neighbor's Wi-Fi. It was fun not having my parents there for a couple nights, so I stayed up late with my new laptop and surfed the web into the early hours of the morning. During my second night of being alone, it snowed late into the evening, and I sat in the dark living room on a folding chair with only my laptop screen for light. With snow falling quietly outside, the neighborhood was silent, as cars don't usually drive past 10 at night, and neighbors stay inside to keep warm. At 2:30 a.m., I decided to head to bed and was wrapping up my internet activities for the night when I heard 3 very slow, quiet knocks on the front door, just a few feet away. I immediately closed my laptop, knowing that the bright screen made me visible to the person outside, since the windows weren't covered. I got off of my chair and walked very quietly over to the door and knelt down below a window to listen outside. Frozen with fear, I waited for what was probably about 2 full minutes when I heard 3 more identical knocks. They were very slow and would have been too quiet to wake anyone up who had been sleeping. I gathered the courage to look outside through the window and saw a dark figure standing very close to the front door, dressed in a black winter coat and black pants, a hood pulled over his head, obscuring his face and his hair, making him unrecognizable, and he stood still with his arms to his sides. I contemplated at that moment calling the police, but ultimately decided to continue waiting. I moved back behind the door away from the window, and after about 2 more minutes had passed, I could see that the man was walking down the walkway past the front of the house, leaving. Suddenly he stopped, turned around, and looked directly at the window through which I watched him. About 15 seconds passed as we stared at each other, but I couldn't see his face under the darkness of his hood. Finally, he turned around and walked down the driveway and walked down the street. I saw he didn't stop at any other houses, just continued down the street, amidst in the falling snow, and I watched him for about 10 minutes until he faded into the darkness. Now, As far as I know, this has not happened since then. I still live in that house and occasionally have nightmares in which the scene replays itself, except that in the dreams, I open the door for him.